this was a special lunar eclipse or supermoon. It's also known, as I said, the blood moon.
It is. I thought it was spectacular. Witnessing a supermoon and lunar eclipse together, that is rare indeed. The question is, how rare? Well, let us tell you. The last one happened back in 1982. But that's exactly what illuminated the skies above Earth over the last few hours.
حجزوه 6 أيام.
They kept him for 6 days. 6 days where they kept his body for revenge. They think they took their revenge on us. May God take his revenge on them.
الله ينتقم منهم.
He took revenge against our filthy enemies. He took revenge and made everyone proud. He made everyone proud. Muhammad.
For every Palestinian citizen, Jerusalem, Al-Aqsa and all sacred places have a place in their hearts. The Holy Sepulchre is holy to us, and we will defend it along with every other sacred place in Jerusalem, despite the occupation's measures taken by Netanyahu.
A wave of stabbings in Jerusalem's Old City and unrest throughout Israel has prompted the Israeli government to step up security. In the past week and a half, stabbings by Palestinians have killed 4 Israelis and wounded at least 10 more. Israeli police responding to the attacks and troops confronting Palestinian protesters have killed at least 20 Palestinians in Jerusalem and the Palestinian territories of Gaza and the West Bank. Israel's military said today a rocket had been fired from Gaza into southern Israel.
The cycle of violence between Palestinians and Israelis has been marked by multiple stabbings, shooting deaths, and hundreds taking to the streets in protest. As CCTV's Stephanie Freed reports from Jerusalem, the clashes are gaining momentum despite appeals for calm.
The Jerusalem spot, where 5 Israelis were attacked by knife-wielding Palestinians in 2 separate incidents, hours apart. The Palestinian perpetrators in both cases were shot dead by Israeli forces on the scene. Israel's government is beefing up security in the city sacred to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism by calling up reserve forces, but the so-called lone wolf attacks continue.
Many of the attacks have happened here in Jerusalem, but as the situation continues escalating, we are also seeing it fan out.
Palestinians frustrated by decades of occupation and fearing an Israeli government attempt to wrest control of holy Islamic sites are taking to the streets of Ramallah, Hebron, Nablus, Gaza, and Israel's Arab-populated cities. Over a 24-hour period, 10 Palestinians were shot dead by Israeli forces, dozens of others were wounded.
We don't respond immediately with a seemingly magical solution, but by operating in a measured, methodical manner. In that manner, we will prove that terrorism does not pay, and we will overcome it.
But as the violence continues, the only thing overcoming Israelis and Palestinians appears to be a growing atmosphere of fear, mistrust, and loathing.
Israeli authorities say a 16-year-old Palestinian stabbed 2 Jews. The mayor of Jerusalem now telling Israelis it is their duty to carry licensed firearms to fight off Palestinian stabbers. In Gaza, medical sources say at least 7 Palestinians were killed and 90 injured as a result of violence there this week. Our Ben Wiedemann is in Jerusalem. Ben, this violence seems to be stemming from the recent restrictions by the Israeli government on a holy site, but there obviously is more to it than just that. What's sparking the violence?
Well, at the moment, it is related to the situation on the Temple Mount, or the Haram al-Sharif, as it's known to Muslims. Increasingly, there seems to be a desire among some Israelis to be able to go onto the Temple Mount and worship, and that is something that wasn't supposed to happen under the so-called status quo that existed on the Temple Mount for decades. But really, when you're looking at the forest of this conflict, that's just the latest tree. It really goes back to the fact that this conflict remains unresolved now for decades, going back at least to 1967. You'll recall that last spring, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry failed, and once again, the United States failing to work out some sort of permanent peace agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And what you get in the absence of even the impression or the idea that there may be a peace process at work and peace somewhere down the road, you have increasingly the feeling among many people that peace is never coming. And you have, for instance, according to the Palestinian Census Bureau, 70% of the population of the West Bank and Gaza is under the age of 29. Increasingly, many of them have, obviously all of them have lived under Israeli occupation their entire lives. They see that there's no political process leading to some sort of peace and the creation of two states. And so increasingly people are turning to violence in the hopes of achieving some sort of end result.
Palestinian teenager Ishaq Badran has been shot dead by Israeli forces in the old city of Jerusalem, Al-Quds. Israeli soldiers claim he had stabbed two settlers near Al-Misrara neighborhood. The killings of Palestinians by the Israeli army come amid a series of stabbing attempts, which the observers say is a reminder of the First Intifada.
This wave of escalation, I think, would continue because of the Israeli policies, and the Palestinians will tend to use other forms and to tend also towards more organizational structure to the Intifada itself, which means that we might witness a third Intifada.
Clashes all over the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem, Al-Quds, increased this week. For the fourth day in a row, Palestinian protesters, including students of the Birzeit University, marched on the Israeli checkpoint of Beit El. The youths threw stones while Israeli soldiers fired live ammunition, tear gas and stun grenades to disperse them. More than 1,200 have been injured during the past week alone. The majority of the people here say that their protest will continue as long as Israeli army kills Palestinian youths.
These protests and activities may not have evolved into a real uprising yet because they do not cover all cities and towns in the West Bank. As long as Palestinians are martyred and the youth are being injured, these clashes will continue, and we hope resistance groups follow the trend on the ground.
The ongoing tensions have sparked fears among the Israelis of a new intifada or uprising. However, it seems that Tel Aviv insists to calm down those fears by describing what's going on as a spike in violence. During the past days, the Palestinians in occupied territories have proved that they will never give in to Israel's aggressive policies in the region. They have also vowed to continue their resistance in different forms. Mona Kandil for Press TV in front of the Israeli military checkpoint of Beit El, occupied Al-Biri.
Violence continues to spread in the Middle East, with 4 Israelis being wounded in the latest round of stabbing attacks by Palestinians. Earlier, a 13-year-old boy was killed by Israeli police during clashes that erupted at a Jewish-only settlement near the West Bank city of Ramallah. When the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened his cabinet on Sunday to discuss the situation, there were no hesitations whatsoever about which side is to blame for the rise in violence.
We're in the midst of a terror wave whose roots are deceitful and systematic incitement regarding Temple Mount. The incitement comes from Hamas, the Palestinian authorities, and the Islamic movement in Israel.
Now, the intensifying violence is causing some anxiety among Israelis living in the West Bank, with many rushing to buy guns for protection. Last week, the mayor of Jerusalem called on Israelis to carry a weapon if they have a license.
And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it.
It's arguably the most sensitive real estate on earth. The Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif as it's known to Muslims, is the epicenter of the long, bitter struggle between Israelis and Palestinians. In September 2000, then opposition leader Ariel Sharon went there under heavy security.
I came here to the holiest place of the Jewish people.
His visit sparked violent clashes, which marked the beginning of the Second Intifada, known to Palestinians as the Aqsa Intifada, after the Aqsa Mosque, located on the Temple Mount. And once again, tensions there are fueling more violence, say young protesters in the West Bank. So why are you here today?
Because the Aqsa Mosque we need for us. The Aqsa is for us. So we will never forgive up.
It's here that Jews believe their holiest of holies, the Temple of Solomon, once stood. For Muslims, the Aqsa Mosque, which sits within the compound, is where they believe the Prophet Muhammad made a miraculous night journey from Mecca before ascending to heaven. When Israel conquered East Jerusalem in 1967, then Defense Minister Moshe Dayan pledged to maintain a strict separation, barring unofficially Jews from worshiping on the Temple Mount in what became known as the status quo. There are few places more emotive to Palestinians and Israelis, says former Jerusalem Deputy Mayor Meron Benvenisti.
Because it's the focal point of the conflicting views, or if you want, ideologies or narratives of both national movements.
Yusuf Nachi works for the Islamic Waqf, or endowment, that oversees the Haram al-Sharif. Underneath the anger over perceived changes to the status quo is a deeper issue.
It is the occupation which causes the frustration, which causes really the unrest of the Palestinians, and that to imagine that young people are ready to die for such a cause.
But the status quo is eroding. In recent years, Israeli authorities have allowed a growing number of Jews to tour the area, and right-wing Israeli politicians have insisted on the right of Jews to pray there. In July, an Israeli cabinet minister called for the building of the third temple on the Temple Mount. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu leads a shaky coalition dominated by hardliners, insists the status quo remains in place, and recently barred Israeli politicians and officials from going to the Temple Mount. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called for a non-violent protest against perceived Israeli attempts to change the status quo. And as leaders on both sides exchange accusations, more and even greater violence around the site is inevitable, warns Benvenisti.
This is something that is a ticking bomb. The question is how long you can postpone the explosion. And for that you need realistic, smart politicians. And I'm afraid I don't find them.
If this is the ticking bomb, what will the explosion look like? Ben Weidman, CNN, Jerusalem.